August 1942. The world holds its breath as the German Sixth Army, the tip of Hitler's spear, marches towards a city bearing the name of his arch-nemesis, Stalingrad. What was meant to be a swift victory, a final nail in the coffin of the Soviet Union, would instead become a frozen, bloody graveyard. This is the story of the battle that broke Hitler, a turning point not just for the war but for the entire 20th century. Before we dive into the brutal street fighting and the icy encirclement, we must understand why Stalingrad was so crucial. For Hitler, capturing the city was a massive propaganda victory. It was named after Stalin himself, and its fall would be a devastating blow to Soviet morale. Strategically, Stalingrad was a vital industrial hub and a key transport link on the Volga River. Controlling it would sever the Soviet Union from the oil fields of the Caucasus, starving its war machine of fuel. The stakes could not have been higher. The German advance, part of Operation Blue, was initially terrifyingly effective. General Friedrich Paulus, a methodical and loyal commander, led his Sixth Army, one of the most powerful and battle-hardened forces in the Wehrmacht. They blitzed across the steppe, supported by the relentless pounding of the Luftwaffe. By late August, their tanks were on the outskirts of Stalingrad. The initial air raids were devastating, turning much of the city into a sea of fire and rubble. Tens of thousands of civilians perished in the first few days. Stalin's infamous Order No. 227, not one step back, meant any retreat was punishable by death. For the soldiers of the Soviet 62nd Army under General Vasily Chuikov, there was nowhere to go. They were trapped between the Germans and the Volga. But the Germans' greatest strength, their mastery of open warfare and combined arms tactics, became their weakness in the ruins of Stalingrad. The city's bombed-out factories, shattered apartment blocks, and labyrinthine sewers became the new battlefield. This was no longer a war of grand maneuvers, it was a Rattenkrieg, a rat war. Every room, every staircase, every pile of rubble was a potential fortress. Soviet defenders, outnumbered and outgunned, adapted brilliantly. They developed a tactic of hugging the enemy, keeping their front lines as close to the Germans as possible, sometimes just a grenade's throw away. This nullified the German advantage in air power and artillery, as any strike would endanger their own troops. Life in the city was a living hell. Snipers became legendary figures on both sides. The Soviet marksman Vasily Zaitsev, credited with over 200 kills, became a national hero. But for every hero there were thousands of unknown soldiers who fought and died in brutal close-quarters combat. Fights raged for iconic locations like the grain elevator, a concrete silo where a small group of Soviet Marines held out for days against overwhelming odds. The Pavlov's house, an apartment building defended by a platoon under Sergeant Yakov Pavlov, became a symbol of Soviet tenacity, holding out for 2 months. The fighting was relentless. Food and ammunition were scarce. Soldiers on both sides suffered from lice, disease, and the constant psychological strain of knowing death could come from any direction at any moment. The average life expectancy of a new Soviet recruit arriving in the city was less than 24 hours. The once mighty Volga River became a lifeline and a death trap, with supply boats braving German artillery and air attacks to bring in just enough men and materiel to keep the defense from collapsing entirely. As autumn turned to winter, the tide began to shift. While Paulus's Sixth Army was bleeding itself white trying to take the last few yards of the city, the Soviet High Command, under Marshal Georgy Zhukov, was quietly planning something audacious. They had been secretly amassing massive reserves on the flanks of the German salient, targeting the weaker Romanian and Italian armies that were protecting the Sixth Army's rear. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus. 2 massive pincers crashed through the Axis flank armies north and south of Stalingrad. The Romanian soldiers, ill-equipped and demoralized, were quickly overrun. The German commanders were caught completely by surprise. Within just 4 days, the 2 Soviet pincers met at the town of Kalach, snapping the trap shut. General Paulus and his entire Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, were encircled. Hitler, in a fatal display of hubris, refused to allow Paulus to attempt a breakout. He promised the Sixth Army they would be supplied by air. The Luftwaffe chief, Hermann Göring, rashly assured Hitler it was possible. But it was a fantasy. An air bridge could never deliver the hundreds of tons of food, fuel, and ammunition needed daily. The encircled army was now at the mercy of the brutal Russian winter. The Kessel, or cauldron, became a frozen hell. Temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers froze to death in their foxholes. Starvation set in. They ate their horses, then dogs, cats, and rats. Ammunition ran out. Frostbite and disease were rampant. A German relief attempt, Operation Winter Storm, was launched in December, but was halted by desperate Soviet resistance, its panzers never getting closer than 30 miles from the trapped army. For the men in the Kessel, that last glimmer of hope was extinguished. By January 1943, the situation was hopeless. The Soviets launched their final offensive, Operation Ring, to liquidate the pocket. They squeezed the perimeter, capturing the last functioning airfields and splitting the German forces in two. On January 31st, a broken and starving General Paulus surrendered from the basement of a department store. Hitler had promoted him to field marshal just hours before, a morbid hint that he should take his own life, as no German field marshal had ever been taken prisoner. Paulus chose to live. The aftermath was staggering. Of the nearly 300,000 Axis soldiers trapped in the cauldron, over 91,000 surrendered. The rest were dead. Of those who surrendered, weakened by starvation and disease, only about 5,000 would ever see their homes again. The Soviet Union also paid a horrific price, with military and civilian casualties estimated to be well over 1 million. The city of Stalingrad was utterly destroyed. But the victory was monumental. For the first time, the myth of German invincibility was shattered. An entire German army had been annihilated. The defeat sent shock waves through Germany and its allies, while it electrified the Allied powers with hope. Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich on the Eastern Front. From this point forward, the Wehrmacht would be in retreat, pushed back relentlessly towards Berlin. The Battle of Stalingrad wasn't just a military turning point. It was a testament to human endurance, sacrifice, and the sheer brutality of total war. It was a crucible that forged a Soviet victory and sealed the fate of Hitler's ambition for world domination. The ghosts of Stalingrad remind us of the terrible cost of tyranny and the incredible price of freedom. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into history compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'll see you next time.